Hi everyone. This is a video that I want to introduce contemporary Chinese literature. Of course, I want you to pay attention to the details in the literature itself, but I'm just providing some background here, and hopefully it helps with your reading as well. So when we come to the topic of contemporary Chinese literature, just like in the beginning of the semester, we asked, what is modern Chinese literature? What is modern? So here, when we say contemporary, of course, this is debatable. So in the case of Chinese literature, some scholars point to 1949 as the start of contemporary, and the others point to late 1970s after the Cultural Revolution, or slightly after 1978, as you know, the opening up policy by Deng Xiaoping. So for today's discussion, I go with the latter wheel, which is after the 70s, like in the late 70s. So one of the first genres to emerge in the late 70s is called scar literature, or we call literature of the wounded, which documents the physical and psychological trauma of the Cultural Revolution. As you know, like the Cultural Revolution from 66 to 76 is very traumatic to a lot of people. So the literature of this short period was extremely powerful because of the raw emotion remaining just after the decade of the Cultural Revolution. These writers were typically not opposed to communism, but instead it relied on the Communist Party to rectify the past tragedies. While there were many novels written, short stories were actually the major mode of scar literature. Two of the most well-known stories are Liu Xingwu's The Class Teacher, published in 1977, 班主任, and Liu Xinhua's Scar, 伤痕. So as you see in the PowerPoint slide here, these are the two. So the story Scar lent its name to the genre. The story narrates the protagonist Xiaohua denounces her mother, who has been labeled as a traitor during the Cultural Revolution. And Xiaohua is unable to join the Communist Youth League because of her mother's status. After 9 years of isolating herself, Xiaohua decides to reunite with her mother, which happens only too late. So in both Liu Xinhua's The Head Teacher and Liu Xinwu's The Head Teacher and Liu Xinhua's The Scar, the main action and reflection occurs in the period directly following the downfall of the Gang of Four, 四人帮. So in The Scar, while on the train back home to see her sick mom, the protagonist Xiaohua is recalling her past 9 years experience. And in The Head Teacher, the school is celebrating the end of the Gang of Four's regime. And both of these stories blame the Gang of Four and suggest that the overarching goal of the party is positive. Although these stories are largely tragic, they often conclude with an optimistic faith in the new leadership and a happy ending. So instead of truthfully represent personal memories of the Cultural Revolution, the literature of the wounded fall into a larger rhetoric that would fit into communist discourse. The trend of scar literature then is followed in the 1980s by root-seeking literature. This is another very important genre called 寻根文学. As some of you read Chinese, root is 根, seek is 寻, right? So it's 寻根文学. It portrays a nostalgic but conflicted vision of the Chinese past, part traditional, part modern. So some of the most representative root-seeking writers are Han Shaogong, Mo Yan, and A Cheng. And they reconnect literature and culture to Chinese traditions and concentrate on violence, sexuality, raw desire, simple heroic self-sacrifice for others. In 1985, Han Shaogong wrote an essay called Literary Roots, 文学的根. This evoked a lot of discussion in the mid-1980s, which intellectuals tried to reconnect pre-communist or even pre-modern Chinese culture in the hope of recovering the destroyed culture during Mao era. To Han Shaogong, Chinese tradition is ruptured by Maoism. and Han saw many of his fellow writers blindly imitate Western culture and literature. In order to distinguish himself from other writers, he uses tradition to connect to the world. And his short story, Homecoming, published in 1985, is engaged with a Taoist idea. Meanwhile, he's not interested in using the old, but grapples with the new. Ma Qiao Dictionary, for instance, playfully blends novel and dictionary. Another good example of blending old and new is Mo Yan. Some of you may have heard of him. He's a 2012 Nobel laureate, very famous. A lot of his works are situated in where he is from, Gaomi County in Shandong. He focused on writing his hometown in Shandong density of people and things to write their own stories, the story of the village people. The Wine Republic, 九国, exemplifies a play of language and structure. Echoing Lu Xun's cannibalistic society and madman's view, the Wine Republic represents a China seen from drunken men's eyes, ambiguous, weird, and absurd. This novel demonstrates Mo Yan's unconventional experiments of new writing techniques in his ironic description of man-eating society. Meanwhile, in direct reaction against the writings of the Ruth Seekers, which sometimes idealize the past, it came up with a new genre at the time called avant-garde literature. It experiments with the new writing techniques and aesthetics different from the scar and rule-seeking literature in the previous 10 years. So some representative writers, which we will explore later, are Yu Hua, Can Xue, and Su Tong. I will just further elaborate on Yu Hua. He was born in 1960, looks at history through death and the problematics of memory and how people reconstruct the past to fit their present needs and desires. He grew up during the Cultural Revolution, and many of his stories and novels are marked by this experience. One of the distinctive characteristics of his works is his detailed descriptions of brutal violence. Many of his characters dazed and confused, not knowing why moved around, by whom, to what end, like the protagonist in On the Road at 18, 18岁的路上. Right? His stories provide perceptions of characters who are paranoid, horrific, civilization that's weak, hence artificial, in obvious contrast to the order of the Maoist years. From the early 1990s, the writers of what had been termed avant-garde fiction and the new realist fiction turned to write about history. Their stories did not handle major historical incidents, but instead described the fate of individuals or families. Just briefly about the 21st century writers. They are more diverse and in some ways respond to the more liberal and open policies of China. One example is the beauty writers. Emerging at the turn of the 21st century, they are called beauty writers because the writers are often beautiful women. Their writings foreground female sexuality. While their stories were censored by the state now and then, they circulate on the internet and contribute to the formation of China's booming internet culture. The initial group of beauty writers have made a large impact on other aspiring female writers eager to explore and expose their sensuality and sexuality. On the left here, you see Mian Mian, born in 1970. Tang, Candy, is about young women's pursuit of the material world with sex central, all valued in quantity, narcissistic as she talks to her body parts in mirror. On the right here is Wei Hui. I'm sure you heard of her Shanghai Baby, 上海宝贝, published in 2000, about the protagonist's sexual adventures with many men, impotent Chinese boyfriend, the German whom she takes whenever and wherever, including public restrooms. Women readers praised it for truly modern girl, but men condemned it. Both books circulated underground, thrive on government attempts to censor it, improve sales actually. As we can see, contemporary Chinese literature reacts against the idea that literature and art should only serve for political ideology. Now, let's turn to the detailed stories for your own discussion.